Good evening, everyone, and welcome to U.S. History from Home. I am your host, anchorwoman Teets, broadcasting live from the comfort and safety of my own home. Today we will be talking about World War II, the next era of history you will be learning about in class. Now, before we get into all of the learning, first we have some very special guests for you today. Our first guest today is a local high school history teacher from Howard High School of Technology, Miss Teets. Hi, Miss Teets. Thank you so much for being on my show today. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your connections with World War II?
Hi, Anchorwoman Teets. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Usually when I introduce World War II, I get to talk about my family. And two of my grandparents were actually involved in World War II.
Really? Please tell us more about that.
Well, first, my poppy, my mother's father, was drafted in World War I. Now, he is one of four, so him and his three other brothers all got drafted at the same time. And what happened is his mother, so my great-grandmother, was so upset that all four of her sons were drafted, and she was worried that they were all going to die because there had been so many casualties from this war already. She wrote the White House a letter and basically begged them to not take all of her sons away from her, and actually got a response back from the First Lady at the time, Eleanor Roosevelt. Unfortunately, the response said, "Thank you for sending your sons," but it was a response nonetheless.
And I have to ask for all of our viewers at home, did your poppy and his brothers all make it back alive from war?
Yeah, all four made it back.
Folks, this is truly a fascinating story that we have heard here. Miss Teets, thank you so much for sharing that with our viewers today.
My pleasure.
Next, we're going to go live with our in-home correspondent to find out some more interesting stories and anecdotes about World War II. To you, in-home correspondent Teets.
Good evening, this is in-home correspondent Teets, going from live inside my home to find out who else has more interesting stories about World War II. Ladies, can you please tell me about your thoughts on World War II? That is truly fascinating. Continuing live from inside of my home, I have found a more helpful person. Sir, please.
How are we doing? Yes, hi.
So, do you know anything about history that you could discuss with us today?
No, I know math.
Math.
I'm pretty good at math.
That is unhelpful. Do you have any grandparents, sir?
I have two grandparents, yes.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Do you know if they fought in World War II at all?
Well, yes, they did. My one grandfather was on the USS Wisconsin. He was a radar technician. And then my other grandpa actually couldn't go over there until after the atomic bomb was dropped. And he went over to Guam and was a minesweeper. So he swept the ocean floor. Well, the boat he was on swept the ocean floor to prevent mines from exploding and killing a bunch of people.
Is that anything like the game, Minesweeper?
I believe it is a little factually the same, yes.
Excellent. And what is a mine?
I believe it's like a bomb that blows up. It's really bad.
Fascinating stuff here. Again, I am at-home correspondent Teets, bringing you information about World War II live from inside of my home. Back to you, Anchorwoman.
Thank you, in-home correspondent Teets. Folks, I need to be honest with you, I was a little unsure where some of those interviews were going, but I definitely think we got some great information about the many roles that people took in World War II, including a little look at what we're going to see eventually is called the atomic bomb, which is how the United States is going to end World War II. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's at the end of the war, and we've barely just begun. For our next segment, we're going to go to our on-the-street interviewer to get some even more perspectives about World War II.
Hey guys, I'm on the street interviewer Teets, here to find some people live on the streets to see what they know about World War II. Let's go!
Hey, sir, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you? My name is Mr. G. Interestingly enough, I actually collect World War II memorabilia.
That is fascinating. Tell us more about that.
I actually have a few pieces of uniform. I have some medals. I have a lot of old pictures. I actually have an old bayonet that was actually used in France.
That is fascinating. Just for our viewers at home, can you tell us what a bayonet is?
So a bayonet is actually a knife that is attached to the front of the weapon. and it's usually used in like close combat or trench warfare, anything like that, where the person would have to get up close because a rifle isn't very good at close range. So they would need something, if an enemy was in their face, that they would be able to use to attack if they needed to.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, before we leave, any other messages for our viewers?
I hope everyone's doing okay. I hope you're all healthy and safe.
For our next On the Street interview, we have found another totally random person to talk about their family members' experiences during World War II. Let's see what they have to say. Excuse me, ma'am?
Hi there, totally random person. Please, tell us your story related to World War II.
Okay, so...
I'm sorry, you're going to need to speak up a little bit more. You're 6 feet away. You are 6 feet away. Please remember that.
Okay, so we call her Omi, which is German for grandma. Actually grew up during the war. So she was 14 years old when the war ended, and she had a little sister who was 7 years younger than her. And unfortunately, her father had died during the war. So she and her sister were struggling a lot during this time. They were hungry for a rather long portion of time during the end of World War II. So eventually, she went to Berlin to see her mother, that's where she was living, and she took her little sister there. However, times were also hard in Berlin. So eventually, Omi, again means grandma, went to Canada to live with her aunt, and that's where she met her husband, who we call Opie. He was actually a machine design specialist, which I got nothing, and he ended up getting a job in America, which then had them move. They went to West Virginia first for about 3 years, and then moved around from there, and then eventually settled in Delaware. So she felt very lucky that she met her husband, and her husband was so helpful in getting her sister here. So I thank my Omi for this story about her experience with World War II.
That is a truly fascinating story. Now, as a follow-up question, and this is very important, so please answer honestly. Is that a dog behind you?
It is a dog.
Thank you once again for your amazing story and also this view of your beautiful dog.
That's
Hello.
Heidi.
Hello, Heidi. Excuse me, ma'am.
Why, yes.
Hi. How are you today?
Okay. How are you?
I'm very good. I am interviewing people randomly on the streets about World War II, and you look very much like Rosie the Riveter.
Why, fancy you should notice. I've taken a real liking to Rosie the Riveter as of late. You know, in quarantine, I'm around my house taking on this real independent working woman vibe.
That is so great to hear. It is always excellent to hear about not only strong women, but those that embody the spirit of famous World War II propaganda characters.
Are you familiar with Rosie the Riveter, ma'am?
I am, but for our viewers, could you please tell me who she is?
I'd be delighted to. You see, Rosie the Riveter was this propaganda symbol to get women out into the working field. You know, when we went into war, all of our men that ordinarily would occupy our factories were out fighting the war. So who's going to be at home making all of the essential wartime materials for our men? Our women. So hence was born Rosie the Riveter, to inspire women to go out into the working force.
That is truly fascinating history. And do you have any personal connections to World War II?
As a matter of fact, I do. My grandmother actually was a Rosie the Riveter type herself. She was at home where there was a mayonnaise factory in her town, and she went to work in this factory. It was converted into a factory for the war effort. My grandfather, meanwhile, they were not yet married. He was fighting in one of the largest battles in World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was the last German offensive. It was this horribly cold, awful battle. It was going on December and January. My grandfather was only 25 years old when he was fighting in this horrible battle, and he saw a lot of gruesome stuff, but through it all, he continually wrote my grandmother love letters and sent them home to her in America.
Thank you so much, Miss Random Person I found on the street who looks just like Rosie the Riveter. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers about World War II?
Make sure to do your work on Schoology.
Thank you you, On the Street Interviewer Teats. Those were some truly inspiring stories that you were able to find totally at random. And I also want to say thank you for practicing social distancing protocols and wearing all proper attire while being out in public spaces. For our next segment, we're going to have a... What is that? Breaking news? What? Live from 1941. We have a message from the president. Please hold. We will put him right through.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Folks, and it truly was a date which would live in infamy. Now, you will learn more about the events leading up to that, but that is not what we'll be covering in this time segment here. Now, for our next visitors, we are going to have more cats. More cats. No more cats. For our next set of visitors, we're going to have some other local experts in World War II history. Joining us live from Zoom, Mr. Polano and Dr. Prettyman. Gentlemen, thank you for joining my show.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
So, Dr. Prettyman, I hear that you are an expert in a lot of the weaponry of World War II. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I am. World War II really set the stage for modern warfare today. It had some of the most exciting weapons, some of the most powerful weapons we've ever seen. They had bazooka rocket launchers that could take down tanks. They had planes that had 4 engines and had 4 machine guns on them. They had aircraft fighters that could carry up to 100 planes at one time. Some bombs they developed that were as powerful as the sun times 10,000. So it was an exciting time to live and an exciting time to fight.
It's not often that you get to hear technology described as exciting when it's used to kill people, so this was truly a treat. Dr. Prettyman, what do you think the most impactful weapon of World War II was?
I'd have to say the atomic bombs.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
I guess I could. With just 2 of them, they took down almost 200,000, over 200,000 people. Devastated lives in Japan, and we're actually going to learn more about that later in the year.
Truly fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Prettyman.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next up, we have Mr. Polano, who seems to be joining us from war. Mr. Polano, where are you right now?
I am in Normandy, France. Well, I'm not. The people behind me are. I'm safely in my basement. But the people behind me are part of the U.S. forces landing in France to liberate them from the Nazis during World War II.
Fascinating. And you said you have some pictures you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, so World War II is probably my favorite thing to teach, and unfortunately we can't be in person together. So I'm hoping that we'll get a lot out of it, kind of doing what we're going to do here. But because I'm so fascinated by it, it sort of led me on a lot of my travels. So a lot of my students know I like to travel, or before I had a kid, I like to travel. And it's kind of led me to go to a few places that maybe I wouldn't. So these first pictures that you see here are from my first trip ever to Europe. I made my wife go to Poland. Most people on their first trip to Europe go to like Rome or Florence. I go to Poland. So right outside, like 40 minutes outside of a city called Krakow, is probably the most notorious death camp from World War II in the Holocaust. So right here, what you can see here, these train tracks that are still here are the train tracks that Jews from all over Nazi-occupied Europe would be transported through. And right behind here, there would be like a big platform where the train would get off. And about 1 million people were murdered here at Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. And then this picture, a year ago, Miss Teets and I think you guys know her. You interviewed her already, right?
She was.
Yeah, she's pretty good. We took a group of students, and part of the trip, we went to France, and we went to Normandy. So right behind our hotel, actually probably about 100 yards behind our hotel, are these German fortifications. So during World War II, Hitler was terrified that the US and the British were going to invade France. So we set up a series of fortifications, and eventually that's what we did. And these fortifications right here were right behind our hotel. So we're able to go for a walk right onto the beach here. And then right where we're standing here are the beaches of, it was called Omaha Beach, where the U.S. invaded during World War II. And during that invasion, about 3,000 U.S. soldiers will die. And we were able to go to that military cemetery, which is the picture here in the upper left corner.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a fantastic evening. There you have it, folks. We have heard some truly fascinating stories this evening from a myriad of different people. And thank you so much again for joining us on U.S. History at Home. Again, I am your host, Anchorwoman Teets, and wishing you a very good evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay learning.